4 bullets ripped through his coat. 2 horses were shot dead beneath him. He kept riding. Every British soldier in that battle was aiming at this one man. He walked away without a scratch. This was 1755. George Washington was just 23 years old, and somehow he survived. This is the story of a man who probably should have died at least 6 times, but didn't, and who became the most important person in the history of the United States. Let's go. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia. His family weren't super rich, tobacco farmers, but they owned land, and land meant everything in Virginia. His father, Augustine, had already been married before and had older kids. It was complicated. But when George was 11 years old, serious, Augustine died. Just like that. No warning. College in England, like his older brothers, gone. The money wasn't there anymore. His older half-brother, Lawrence, took him in. Lawrence was basically everything George wanted to be. Tall, charming, military officer, respected by everyone. Young George followed him around like a puppy. George also discovered he was incredible at one specific thing, surveying land. At 16, he was already trekking through the wilderness, mapping territory for wealthy landowners, getting paid. He was getting paid, getting tough, and getting very, very tall. 6'2" by 17. In an era when most men were 5'7", he walked into rooms and rooms noticed. Then tragedy again. Lawrence got tuberculosis, and in 1752 he died. George inherited part of the family estate, including a plantation on the Potomac called Mount Vernon. But he also inherited Lawrence's military connections and an enormous chip on his shoulder. In 1753, Virginia's governor sent 21-year-old Washington on a diplomatic mission to the French. Go tell the French to leave our territory. The French looked at this kid and basically laughed. Washington came back, wrote up his report. The governor published it. Suddenly, Washington was famous. The French and Indian War was kicking off, and Washington wanted in. He got his chance in 1755. He was riding with British General Braddock, nearly 1,000 soldiers, marching into French-held territory. Then the French and their Native American allies hit them from all sides. Complete ambush. Braddock got shot. Officers dropped one by one. The whole column panicked and ran. Washington had 4 bullets go through his coat. 2 horses shot dead beneath him. Not a single scratch. He rallied what troops were left, covered the retreat, saved hundreds of lives. A Native American war chief there, that day, said his warriors deliberately targeted Washington multiple times. We shot at him more than a dozen times. We believe he is protected by the Great Spirit. 23 years old, already a legend, excited, but honestly, the real story was just getting started. Here's something they don't teach you in school. George Washington was absolutely terrible with women. He wrote love letters. They were spectacular disasters. One literally started, "Dear Madam, I embrace this opportunity." The woman he was actually in love with, Sally Fairfax, was already married to his best friend. Awkward. So when he met Martha Dandridge in 1758, something clicked. Martha was a widow and very, very wealthy. Martha owned over 17,000 acres and more than 100 enslaved people, one of Virginia's richest. They married in January 1759. George got stability, land, and a partner who would change his life. And here's the thing, they were genuinely great together. Martha kept George grounded his whole life. Life at Mount Vernon was honestly great. Washington loved farming, like obsessively loved it. He experimented with crop rotation, designed new farm tools, wrote detailed notes about everything he grew. He also had a deeply serious ice cream problem. Historical records show he spent a fortune on it. But Britain was about to ruin everything. 1765, the Stamp Act, a tax on every single document. Then the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act, tax after tax with zero say in Parliament. Taxation without representation. Washington started writing letters, attending meetings, getting very, very angry. Then, December 1773, Boston. Men dressed as Native Americans dumped 342 chests of British tea into the harbor. Britain's response was to shut down Boston's port and station soldiers in people's actual homes. Serious. The colonies decided they needed to talk. First Continental Congress, Philadelphia, 1774. Washington sat there mostly quiet, listening, but everyone in that room kept looking at him. 6'2", military hero of the French and Indian War. He looked exactly like what a leader should look like. Then April 1775, Lexington and Concord. Serious. The shooting started. The war was real. The Second Continental Congress met in May 1775. They needed a commander for their army, fast. Washington showed up wearing his old military uniform. Very subtle, George, very subtle. On June 15, 1775, the Congress voted George Washington, Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. His response was basically, "I'm genuinely not sure I can do this. Please reconsider." He wasn't being humble. He went home and told Martha he didn't expect to survive. He also refused a salary, expenses only. He kept meticulous records of every single penny spent. Now, about this army. Oh boy. Washington arrived at camp outside Boston to find a situation. Barely trained farmers, soldiers who literally quit mid-battle when their enlistment contract ran out. Soldiers who brought their families, soldiers who refused to dig trenches because it was beneath them. When Washington learned exactly how little gunpowder they had, he didn't speak for 30 seconds. But he had one unbeatable quality: absolute, stubborn, relentless determination. He trained them, disciplined them, wrote Congress constantly begging for supplies they usually didn't send. He pushed the British out of Boston in March 1776. First major victory. The army went wild. But then, New York. Washington moved his army to defend New York City. Britain sent 32,000 soldiers and 400 ships. Washington had maybe 19,000, many of them sick. The British destroyed them. Battle after battle, Washington lost. His army was falling apart fast. By December 1776, he had roughly 3,000 men left, retreating through New Jersey in the freezing cold. One soldier wrote in his diary, "The army is dissolving. I believe Washington himself is without hope." Thomas Paine was writing pamphlets at this exact moment. These are the times that try men's souls. Washington read it aloud to his troops. Then he made a decision. Christmas night, the Delaware. The Delaware River was full of massive chunks of ice. It was dark, snowing, below freezing. Washington loaded his entire remaining army, horses, cannons, men, into flat-bottomed boats. At night, in a blizzard, they crossed, marched 9 miles through the storm, hit the Hessian camp at Trenton at dawn. Excited! The Hessians were German soldiers hired by Britain. They had celebrated Christmas the night before. Not ready. Complete victory. Nearly 1,000 prisoners. Washington lost 0 men in the battle. 0. Enlistments surged back up. France started paying close attention. The war was still alive. Then, in 1777, a 19-year-old French nobleman arrived to join the fight on his own dime. The Marquis de Lafayette paid his own way, bought his own ship, just showed up and said hello. Washington and Lafayette clicked almost immediately, like father and son from the very first meeting. But first, before France officially joined, came the winter that nearly ended everything. Valley Forge, December 1777. 11,000 soldiers, no real food, no proper clothes. Nearly 2,000 would die that winter. Soldiers wrapped rags around their feet because they had no boots. Blood stained the snow where they walked. Washington did something no general before him had really done. He stayed. He stayed with all of them. He didn't retreat to a mansion. He lived in a tent and then a tiny farmhouse right there with them. Martha came to Valley Forge. She cooked, nursed the sick, mended clothes. The general's wife doing laundry. When spring finally came, Washington had a different army. Drilled, hardened, angry, ready. And then France officially entered the war in 1778. Ships, money, troops, everything shifted. For the next 3 years, it was brutal. But Washington kept finding ways to survive, to keep waiting. Then in 1781, the trap. Cornwallis and his army were stuck at Yorktown, Virginia, a peninsula. The French fleet blocked the sea. Washington marched 400 miles south in secret. Cornwallis had no idea. The trap closed. The bombardment began. Cornwallis had nowhere to go and nothing left to fight with. October 19th, 1781. Cornwallis surrendered. The British band literally played "The World Turned Upside Down." Cornwallis was so mortified he claimed he was sick and sent a subordinate to hand over his sword. The Revolutionary War was effectively over. The peace treaty would come in 1783. And here is where the story gets truly extraordinary. What does Washington do now? He is the most powerful man in America. His army worships him. The people adore him. He could do anything. Some of his own officers wrote to him directly, "The men will follow you anywhere. Make yourself king." Historians say his response was one of the most important letters ever written in American history. "You could not have found a person to whom your schemes are more disagreeable." He said no. December 1783. He walked into Congress, handed back his military commission, bowed, and left. King George III of Britain heard what Washington had done. Ho! He reportedly stopped cold. "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world," said the actual King of Britain. Washington just wanted to go home, back to Mount Vernon, back to farming, back to ice cream. He lasted 4 years before they dragged him back. 1787, Constitutional Convention. Every delegate assumed Washington would be the first president. He showed up, therefore he was the president. First presidential election. He won unanimously. Every single electoral vote. That has never happened since April 30th, 1789. New York City. George Washington became the first president of the United States. He was completely inventing the job as he went. Nobody had ever been a president before. Everything was new. How should people address him? Some suggested His Highness. Washington chose Mr. President. Done. He hated the dinners, hated the parties, famously stiff and awkward at every social event. He held formal receptions where he would only bow, never shake hands, never. Too informal, apparently. Martha said publicly he was miserable. He wrote to friends it felt like a prison sentence. But he did the job. Built the executive branch from nothing. Set precedents that still exist today. After 4 years, he desperately wanted to quit. His advisors begged him to stay. The country needed him. He agreed to one more term. But one. He made that crystal clear to everyone. In 1796, he published his farewell address and quit. Voluntarily gave up all of it. Something almost no leader in all of human history had ever done. He just handed it back. John Adams became president. Washington rode back to Mount Vernon, and this time he was genuinely happy. Farming, letters, alarming quantities of ice cream, and Martha, genuinely, completely content. Then December 1799. Washington woke up with a sore throat after riding in cold rain the day before. His doctors were called. They used the standard treatment of the era. They bled him. In one day they removed somewhere between 5 and 9 pints of blood from a man who was already very sick. Modern doctors are clear. The bloodletting killed him. The sore throat alone was treatable. December 14th, 1799, 10 p.m. George Washington died. He was 67 years old. His last words, reportedly, "'Tis well." Dramatic pause. 2 words. After all of that, "'Tis well." When news reached Congress, even his fiercest political enemies were devastated. The entire country mourned. Napoleon Bonaparte ordered 10 days of mourning across the entire French military. Oh, Napoleon! 10 days! Now, the cherry tree. I cannot tell a lie, Father. Completely. 100% made up. A biographer named Parson Weems invented it years after Washington died to make him seem more virtuous. Also the wooden teeth? Not wood. Ivory, human teeth, and gold. Human teeth. Let that sink in. But here's what was absolutely real. A man told he'd die young, who kept not dying. Offered a crown, who said no. Given absolute power, who gave it back? Twice. In a world full of people who grab power and refuse to let go, George Washington let go. Twice. That, more than the battles, more than the presidency, is why we still talk about him today.